This is a Geek Leader. Hey, Geek Leaders. Welcome to episode 183 of Geek Leader Podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. And today's episode is brought to you by Live at Manning Conferences, Math for Data Science. If you're securing a job in data science, artificial intelligence, machine learning, or cryptography, or any other programming field, you have to realize that it requires strong math skills. And the Live at Manning Conference Series is doing an event, Math for Data Science, and it is a unique chance to learn from some of the statisticians and other math masters that are involved in the Manning network of experts. And it's a free event, which is awesome. It's live on Twitch on December 1st, on December 1st, 2020 at noon Eastern Time. And you can find out more about that at geekleader.com/math. Again, that's at geekleader.com/math. All right, Geek Leaders, today on the show, I've got Tim Ringo, and he's the author of Solving the Productivity Puzzle. He's been working as an advisor, working with HR and HR software as consultants for more than 30 years. And Tim, I am honored to have you on the show to talk about how we can solve some of this productivity puzzle that we're running into.
Yeah, thanks, John. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
If you don't mind telling the audience just a little bit about kind of what your career's been like and how you got to where you are, and also how or why productivity is something that you wanted to tackle.
Yeah, so my career has actually been fairly accidental. I graduated from Ohio State University in 1990 with a degree in finance and English, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I'd heard of a company called Anderson Consulting, which was sort of emerging as part of Arthur Anderson, the accountancy, but they focused on, emerging technology around the computer, which we forget 30 years ago it was fairly new, and it just sounded really interesting. And I asked them, "Hey, am I going to get to travel?" And they're like, "Yep, we can do lots of traveling." So that sounds good to me. So it seemed like technology was the future. I'm going to get a chance to travel, and that's how it worked out. So I was there for 16 years. I was a partner, senior partner in what became Accenture, and really throughout my time there, I was just fascinated with how people aligned technology, how they handle technological change. And so I worked in what was known as the change management practice, and then became the human performance service line. And so I was always fascinated by that. I was recruited to IBM in 2006 to lead their global human capital practice around consulting and software. And again, very focused on, a large team focused on helping people deal with technological change. And then I joined in 2014, I joined SAP SuccessFactors, which was an HR platform that I've been working around and with for many years. And so I switched to the kind of the software side. And again, what I focused on there was helping SAP customers deal with technological change, which really gets to then how the book came about. So in 2018, I read a paper by the OECD, which was projecting out to 2060 that there was going to be downward pressure on GDP for the next 50 years, mainly because people productivity was lagging, and they were predicting was going to continue to lag. And I thought, well, that's awfully pessimistic. That isn't really what I'm seeing. And essentially, they saw three things. One, companies not investing in aligning people to technology. Two, they're not changing their processes to take advantage of technology. And three, they weren't changing their org structures to take advantage. And I agree with those three things, but where I disagree is that I see companies working, pretty hard to fix these things at the moment. And so I looked through some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, came up with a framework, which I call PEIP, which we can talk about, and really just built everything from there. But the idea of the book was to be conversational, easy to read, not academic. These are eminently solvable problems, so I kept it pretty simple.
Yeah, and the PEIP is People, Engagement, Innovation, and Performance, correct?
That's right, yeah.
So is that something that you came up with, or is it something that you just kind of codified and put in the book, or where did that come from?
Well, I came up with it, and I came up with it a very long time ago. In 1999, I was working for British Telecom when I was at Accenture, and I was going into a meeting with a very senior executive, and he had been describing. He was saying, if I could just get the right people in the right place at the right time, that would help us tremendously. And really, I sort of built on that, and I've used this model for a long time to show people that if you want to drive change in an organization, if you want to drive engagement, and then ultimately create an innovative and a place where people flourish, you want to help get right people, right place, right skills, right time, and I think most importantly, right motivation, right? And organizations that perform really well do that as a mindset, first of all, second, as a set of processes, and lastly, put in technology to support that. I call it an equation. So it's, right people, right place, right time, right skills, right motivation equals PEIP, people engagement, innovation, and performance. And that's the outcome you get when you have this as a mindset and a way of working.
Yeah, and one of the things I like about your book, and that's important to me, I think, is the way you talk about adding technology in there as well as something that can amplify these things. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you've seen with technology that could be used, to help increase the motivation or get the right motivation for teams and people?
Yeah. Well, one thing I learned in my career, and since I've always worked in technology, really, I've always been a big proponent of technology is the last thing you do. If you're going to create change and you're going to do things differently, it starts with thinking differently. Then it starts with putting an operating model and processes in place to do differently. And then the technology, as you said, is just the facilitator. It's the enabler, and it's really the things in that order. However, technology, being third on the list, can be really powerful if it's seen as something that helps augment the human, right? So instead of it replacing the human, it makes the human better at their job. It makes humans, enjoy the job more. And so I'm a big proponent of harnessing technology versus, using it to necessarily replace people. If it replaces a person, it should then allow, we've seen this over history, it will allow them then to do a different job, a more interesting job, right? Mm-hmm. And that's how technology really should be used. It should be kind of the third thing you do, and then you should use it to make people better, to help them flourish. And that's where technology is really powerful. And if we add to that, then and I talk about this in the book, if you take artificial intelligence and machine learning, which are coming along at great leaps, that is really powerful. And I say basically take PEIP, that mindset and process and technology, then multiply it by artificial intelligence and those sorts of things. And I take the complete opposite view of the OECD and say, right, we're going to see historic people productivity because of this kind of way of doing things and using technology to augment it. So I'm in what I call the optimist camp, and I sort of put the OECD in the pessimist camp, and that's okay because you need to have that kind of debate, right?
Yeah, and I'm with you on that too. Like when I look at, just take the automobile, right? So I used to have a 1966 Mustang. I love the old cars.
Nice one, yeah, very nice.
But currently I've got a Tesla and my Lex. Mm-hmm. So when you take a look at that car and the leaps and bounds that have happened, over the time period between the old Mustang and the Tesla, it drives by itself for the most part. I haven't had any problems with it. You can summon it to come pick you up. It's got all this technology in there, and I feel like the productivity that can enable us. And when you take that even a step further, imagine being able to, right now with COVID, a lot of people aren't commuting, right? We're doing everything remotely, and I've seen significant productivities from the teams that I've worked with. Because the commute time is gone, some of the distractions at work are gone. We have, it's almost like, I try to put a positive spin on a lot of things, kind of like you do. And with COVID, it's a terrible thing that's happened, but there's a lot of positives that come out of it. And look at the advancement in technology. I feel like it's accelerated some of the things that were already there that we weren't using as a business. And
that's right.
I think that's just going to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the car is a great analogy, and I use it in some of the blogs I write. And you can take the 66 Mustang, which was essentially a machine that was loud, fun to drive, but essentially its main function was to get you somewhere faster than you could otherwise. Today, a Tesla it's actually augmenting the human, right? It is making you more productive. It's making you more safe. It's a really completely different model, right? And that's how I'm sort of seeing old, sort of people technology and new technology. That's a great analogy there. And I think using that as a place to start is exactly right, and why I'm very optimistic about the future, because as you say, the pandemic it's a tragedy, and disasters are, but I think this one has knocked us onto a different path in the workplace. It's a better one than we were on before. So, I looked at kind of 10 challenges, 10, well, I call them opportunities, around productivity. And, almost all 10 of those, I came up with them a year ago, are all now being accelerated because of the pandemic. And I think we're going to be in a better place than we were before.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that I've seen is that a lot of companies, and I think you mentioned this earlier, we talked about productivity going down. There's a lot of new technologies out there that people aren't using, and maybe the pandemic's helping us, get to that point. And there was a quote that I read. Um, Gosh, I can't remember where I read it from, but basically they were taking an analogy of a gun and war and stuff like that. But they were saying, with new technologies, it's almost like the fact that instead of using your musket, you bought a new automatic machine gun or something, right? But you load one bullet at a time, because you're still doing things the old way. You haven't changed your processes to catch up to the technologies. How do you see productivity, increasing, or people being more positive on the idea of being more productive by taking advantage of some of those technologies?
Well, this is kind of the core of the book, really, which is saying that to a certain extent, the OECD is right. There are not enough companies and organizations and people demanding change around the idea of PEIP, right? So I think that is, the main challenge. And so when I went and looked at the sort of 10 things that I saw were kind of trends that were coming along, everything from how people are motivated in the 21st century, how rewards and compensation are being changed, the retirement of traditional retirement. We're moving into more of a kind of pro-retirement, where people have multiple careers, out until their old age. These sorts of things that we can actually take these things and turbocharge the future if we use the crisis as an opportunity to think and do differently. And that's really at the core of the idea. It just happened to be the book just ended up coinciding with the pandemic, and there is a focus on productivity because there was a challenge before. And absolutely, we've seen people productivity stagnate for 10 years. But we can either, address it now and fix it once and for all, or we're going to continue on this path, which the OECD says, we're not going to take full advantage. And that's kind of the thing I want to sort of try to change the thinking on in the book.
Yeah. So one of the thoughts that I had when I was reading about your talk about the potential GDP going down and the actual wealth per person going down. I see that like there's a divide kind of going on in the United States that right now we see some of the extreme billionaires becoming more and more wealthy, and some of the impoverished people becoming more and more poor. Do you see productivity maybe balancing that out some more, or is that not even a play on this?
No, it's actually one of the things. When I sat down to write the book, I went and looked up the definition of productivity, and it's the following: various measures of the efficiency of production. A productivity measure is expressed as the ratio of output to inputs used in production process, i.e. widgets and people producing. So it's like, that's very 21st century. That's very sort of, you've got a company boss and you've got a bunch of workers producing stuff in a factory or in a farm. That's just not what things are like today. So I had to sort of redefine it and say, look, this is actually, it's more three-dimensional these days. And the new definition that I propose is the following, which is getting stuff done that measurably improves the economic and human interests of organizations and society at large. So it's not just about the physical inputs, outputs. It's about what are we doing that's creating a better society, a better individual, a better organization, one that allows people to flourish. And it's a more three-dimensional view, which takes into account, you want an engaged workforce. You want them in the right place at the right time. You want to, tap into their motivations. So it's a different sort of view, right? And so absolutely, I think that us looking at productivity differently, because I actually don't really like the word. That's why I put PEIP as, it's about performance, not productivity. But anyway, productivity is the word that everybody recognizes, but you have to redefine it. And I think it's absolutely about making society better, people better, and organizations better, not just you're here to produce something and then when you're done, you go home and that's the end, right? I think it's a 24-hour, 7-day a week, aspiration to make everything better.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think when I'm thinking about that and trying to understand, this new definition of productivity, I do feel like, society has improved so much over the last, 50 years. And I do feel like we are improving, but there's some people that that say that we're in a worse off spot. What do you say? What do you say to those folks?
Well, I totally agree. By all measures, from the 1960s to today, there is less poverty, there's less war, there's less strife. There's more technology, there's better, uh, certainly a big revolution in medical science. It's allowing people to live much longer. These things are unprecedented, but it still leaves some people behind, and that's why I think we have to look at ways to avoid that. So one of the things that I think the pandemic has caused an accelerated discussion is around this idea of universal healthcare, universal income, right? And some people can say, well, that's socialist or communist, whatever. Set that aside. I think that's old way of thinking. I think there's a certain attractiveness to saying, look, can we just kind of put in place a situation where people aren't necessarily worried about putting food on the table. They're not worried about if they get sick, they can't pay for it. What if we had this base level and then people could focus on the job? And lots of data, and I list a lot of it in the book, shows that when people don't have money or their health on their mind, they are tremendously engaged and productive,
Yeah.
right? But that's a different society than we have today, right? Particularly in the United States, where we don't have universal health care. And that's a drag on the U.S. economy because people feel less free to go pursue the thing that maybe they really want to do, because they could go out without health care for 6 months while they look for that job. And we have to look at and say, isn't this inefficient? Isn't this not a good way to organize? It's a valid question, I think.
Yeah. And I think it was a political candidate, Andrew Yang, I think was talking about universal basic income of giving that.
He was, yeah.
And
Yeah.
I remember hearing an interview where we were talking about, or people were talking about the fact that if you, took those, basic needs off the table,
Yeah.
there is a potential that people could, say, well, I've got my things covered. I'm just not going to do anything. But then there's the exact opposite of that, right? People can actually pursue the things that are more interesting, more creative and advanced technology forward, because they don't have to worry about taking care of their family or feeding themselves.
Exactly. And I believe if I remember correctly, I think he's actually doing an experiment on that at the moment. I think he's paying a number of families a basic income and basic health insurance for a period of time. I can't remember how long he's going to do it, just to prove the point that these people did not just go and watch TV all day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. I think that was very forward thinking, and it was good to have him in the presidential race because he talked about these things. And people can think they're kind of on the fringe, these ideas, but they're not. These are serious people, serious organizations looking at, is there is this a way forward? And Daniel Pink's book Drive, which I
Yes,
talk a
love that
lot
book.
about in the book, it just changed my world really when I read it. It just so fit with where I was and what I had seen over at that point, a 20-year career. And Daniel Pink goes through immense amounts of data that when people are not focused on their bonus or their money or their healthcare, they can do tremendously productive and innovative things. And that's what I think we need to have this discussion. And I talk quite a bit in the book about the book has a kind of theme throughout about how do we create this kind of new way of thinking about productivity and performance and organization. So yeah.
And I love Daniel Pink's book Drive. And I remember when I first read that, like you said, probably 10 years ago, there was a part in there where he talked about you pay people enough so that money's off the table.
That's right.
And that way they're not focused on that, and they can focus on the more important things and be motivated to do the more important things. So, he mentioned that money is a motivator, but it's not the motivator. And, I love that part of his book when he went through, what actually truly motivates people.
Exactly. And that's why I emphasize in my equation, my quote unquote equation at PEIP, I really emphasize motivation, because that kind of drives the whole equation. If you just have right people, right place, right time, right skills, you've only got about half of the solution. But when you've tapped into that person's motivation for what they do, that's where tremendous performance and innovation can come from.
Yeah. And so I'm looking at the 10 things that you talk about in your book that, you talk about, drive, emerging workforce, and several other things. There's one thing that struck out, kind of came to mind. Basically, well, there's a lot of stuff that kind of correlated with this pandemic we've been going through, but one of them was well-being at work and well-being at home. That
Yeah.
healthy and happy workforce is an engaged workforce. Can you talk a little bit about, um, kind of where you were going there? And to me, it sounds like it's fantastic with the things that we're seeing a lot of tech companies and other companies do right now, with allowing their employees to work from home, to working with them on,
Mm.
child care, because of at home school that's going on with many people. There's been so much advancement that I've seen with companies trying to make sure that their employees are taken
Yeah.
care of during this.
Yep. Yep.
And it seems to be like right in line with the things that you're saying people need to do.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because when I was sat down to write the book and choose my kind of, here's the top 10 trends I see that are both, challenges and opportunities, well-being almost didn't make the list, because I thought, wow, that's just a hygiene factor. It's not that important. But my wife kept putting articles in my hand as I was writing. So you've got to read this. You really do need to think about this. And so it really got me looking into the research of just how important it is for people to be physically well, mentally well, and financially well. And those three things together, when an organization focuses on those three things in their wellness programs, they're super effective. And it just emerged really quickly into my top 10. In fact, I say it's like the top 2 or 3 things that organizations really need to do well, which is to help people. You can't tell them to do something, you can't force it, but help them to be physically well, to be mentally well, and to be financially well. And it cures many ills inside of an organization. And as we've seen in the pandemic, that organizations that look after people, you create tremendous amounts of loyalty and engagement, and that's really, really powerful. In fact, getting it to the leadership level, I'm absolutely convinced that the leaders during this pandemic that showed high EQ, right, so it showed high empathy, are going to be the stars of the next 5 years, right? Everyone's going to want to go work for them, because they saw how they handled a really difficult time and looked after people. So for me, this whole well-being thing emerged as super important to solving productivity, solving the productivity puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's been so much advancement in that area that it's definitely been important, especially, with people that are looking for jobs. They're going to focus on those companies, that really took care of their people.
Yeah.
Another thing you talk about is going from big data to smart data. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so my first book I co-wrote with a couple of colleagues was called Calculating Success on Harvard Business Review, and it was about HR analytics. It's about 10 years ago now. And one of the things that we learned in that was that if you've got big data, you've got nothing. You just have a bunch. You can't see the wood for the trees. It's that old kind of analogy. And I found that organizations that were make best use of data were those that have smart data. In other words, they have small amount chunks that they can, small chunks that they can make sense of and do something with. And I think it's particularly important in HR, because, if you tell employees that in HR we have big data, we have lots of data on you, that is not a good feeling for them, right? What they want is for you to have, relevant information about them that helps them flourish at work. And so, big data is bad, smart data, small chunks of relevant things is much better.
Yeah, and I see that from a cybersecurity standpoint as well. There used to be this land grab for data. Let's get all the data we can, and some companies are still doing that. But I've always thought, from like security and privacy standpoint, we need to keep as little data as possible. Let's keep the relevant stuff, the important stuff, so that way we're not at risk.
Exactly. So I'm not a fan, as you can probably tell, of this idea of big data, and never have been. So yeah.
And there was another thing, one more thing that I really want to hit on is you talk about the retirement of traditional retirement. And when I read about that, the thing that really struck me is I teach part-time at Winthrop University. And,
Mm-hmm.
my goal is when I finish my career in technology, I'm going to just teach, and that's going to be my retirement. And it seems to be a trend of people kind of, like you said, shifting careers at retirement and it not being the same thing. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I sort of look back at my grandfather and my father and uncles, and they worked in at General Motors in the factories, and they retired at my age, 55, and that was it. They played golf for the next 20, 25 years, and that was tremendously. It was great for them. They had great pensions, they had great healthcare, that sort of thing. But I don't think that is the way people think these days. I think, so I got to the end. So 30 years, I thought, right, that's enough. I'm going to go and retire, as people call it, but I call it Protire. And I'm going to go do stuff that really motivates me, like writing the books. I like doing these podcasts. I like, having a point of view and writing about it. And that's what I'm going to do, similar to you. I guess, kind of what I'm doing is a similar version of teaching as well. And that's what motivates me. And I'm not going to make a fortune from it. And that's okay. That's not my focus anymore. I've kind of, had my career, saved a bit of money, and moving on to it. And that's, I think more and more people are going to do that. And this term protirement, I found it in my research, was actually coined in 1960s. It just kind of, it went out there and then it disappeared. And I just kind of want to bring it back because I think it does explain what a lot of people are doing. They're getting to 55, 60. They're saying, well, I'm going to be, I'm healthy enough to work for another 20 years. Well, I'm going to do something that I like. But I think it's important that you do something that you like, but also that you do get some compensation for. You should feel valued for whatever it is you're doing, right? But it isn't the focus, right? The money is not the focus, and that's really, I think, ideal. And as I say in the book, there's more and more research showing that, particularly for men, if you work until your early 70s, work in something meaningful that you like, you have a very high, very improved opportunity to probably live to 90 or more. That it's actually good for you to stay in some kind of engaged employment until the early 70s. And more data is showing that it's actually good for your health.
Yeah, I've seen that, personally. I've watched, relatives retire and then, health deteriorate rapidly, partly because they, in my opinion, I feel like they don't feel like they bring value anymore. So what's it matter? They just sit around and watch TV, or, they're not as active anymore. Their minds aren't as active anymore. And, I think your brain's like a muscle. You got to exercise it. You got to do stuff. You got to stay current. That's why my goal is to always, retire from work and then teach or do something else that's going to keep my brain active and keep me excited and motivated and give me purpose, like Dan T says.
Exactly. And the good news is there's a quiet revolution in medical science. I mean, they are solving the aging problem, right? Solving the aging puzzle at the moment. And, in our lifetime, it's quite possible that, growing old will be something of kind of the past. You'll be able to get replacement parts and things like that. So, you want to keep going, right? And I'm really enjoying it. Unfortunately, I retired or pro-tired during the pandemic. So I've been a bit locked down, which isn't ideal, but I am enjoying it.
Yeah. With all the advancements that are going along with like stem cell research and even you look at Elon Musk Neuralink, what's that going to do to our brain capacity in the future? Who knows? But
Exactly.
yeah, there's such a bright future out there, and I really love the fact that your book kind of highlights some of the benefits that could be there by being more productive.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun to write. So I enjoyed it, and the feedback's good on it. Lots of so good reviews. People who don't even like business books seem to like it because the idea was to make it conversational and easy to read.
So where can people find out more about you and maybe pick up a copy of the book and learn more about some of the things that you have about being more productive?
Yeah, so probably the best place is my website, timringo.com. Really easy to remember, timringo.com. On there, I've got more information about my books. My upcoming book called Accidental Globalist, which will come out next year. I've also got my blogs. I do a Tim Talk video. I'm doing a series right now on those who can't work from home. So I've been interviewing people in my travels recently to understand what it's like to not be able to work from home in the pandemic. So you can see that on my website. Book can be found on Amazon, Amazon.com, really easy, or you can also order it through my website, my publisher, Kogan Page.
Awesome. And I'm going to link all that up in the show notes as well. And when your new book comes out, I'd love to have you on to talk about that as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. That one's that's fun to write. So yeah, I think that one will end up being very timely as well.
All right. Well, I really enjoyed having you on, and thanks so much.
Thanks, John. Much appreciated.
Hope you guys enjoyed that interview, and if so, please share it with a friend. Don't forget to leave a rating and review in Apple Podcast and share the episode on social media. And also, don't forget about our sponsor, the Manning's Math for Data Science Conference. It's a free event on December 1st, and you can find out more about that at geekleader.com/math.